What's up, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this. And this video is actually important to me personally because there's this constant, what I would call lie. And I say it's a lie because although there may be a small, minute element of truth to it, it is based in disingenuous deceit. And it is also based off of these false conflations of numbers that we later on figured out were not true, right? So there's this idea for that once again, it's an idea that's, of course, coincidentally enough and conveniently enough, perpetuated by the mainstream, that Bernie Sanders has a black problem, that he has never really put any black people in any position to make his campaign a success with minorities, which is weird and there's a lot of reasons as to why that's weird. But I want to go ahead and show you one of the articles that has asserted this. This is by the New York Times, and this was a few days ago. It was done on February 17th. They said Bernie Sanders stumbled with the with black voters in 2016. Can he do better in 2020? He didn't stumble, and I'm going to talk. Don't worry. Shortly after Senator Bernie Sanders suffered a crushing loss in South Carolina's Democratic primary in 2016, his campaign's African-American outreach team sent a memo to the top campaign leaders with an urgent warning. The margin by which we lost the African-American vote has got to be at the very least cut in half, or there's simply no path to victory. The team wrote in the memo, which was reviewed by the New York Times. Mr. Sanders had won 14% of the black vote there, and compared to 86% for Hillary Clinton, according to exit polls. Over 7 pages, the team outlined a strategy for winning black voters that included using social media influencers and having Mr. Sanders give a speech on discrimination in a city like St. Louis or Cincinnati. Mr. Sanders' inner circle did not respond. In a campaign in which Mr. Sanders badly needed his message against inequality to catch fire with black voters, the senator from Vermont and his senior leaders struggled to prioritize and execute a winning plan to build their support. Top aides lost faith in their African-American outreach organizers, whose leadership was replaced and whose team members were scattered across the country. Initiatives like a tour of historically black colleges and universities fizzled, and Mr. Sanders even missed its kickoff event. Mr. Sanders prepares to announce another run for the White House as early as this week. His weak track record with black voters, a vital base in the Democratic Party, could be a potential threat to his candidacy. And his campaign's experience in 2016, as described in the interviews with nearly 24 current and former advisors and staff members, reveals a strikingly uneven commitment on the part of Mr. Sanders and his top advisors to organize and communicate effectively with black voters. So I want to go ahead and say that there is partial truth to that, right? And the partial truth is that there was some disruption. And the campaign, unfortunately enough, was cutting Bernie Sanders off from black voters. I don't know who is doing, or black leadership. I don't know who is doing it. I wish I could tell you, but I know it was happening. I worked with Jam Pack to try and figure out what exactly was going on. But most importantly, and more importantly, I worked with Bernie Sanders' campaign. Now, they say in the beginning, the campaign hired all white people. But I want to be very clear about this. And I can't really be any clearer than I am right now. Black people were not rushing to join Bernie Sanders' campaign in the beginning because it wasn't lucrative. It was not going to pay well in the beginning because nobody knew that he was going to end up being this dominant figure. A lot of people who worked for Bernie in the beginning didn't get paid. Okay. I can't really be I don't know how to be more clear about that. Black people, he was a senator from Vermont. And even though he was an honorary member of the Congressional Black Caucus, we all know who the Congressional Black Caucus endorsed. Remember? Did we forget? They endorsed Hillary Clinton. But we're going to talk about that too. People were looking for a job. They were looking for a place in Hillary Clinton's administration. They were looking out for themselves. And I'm going to be very clear about that. I have no problem. At the time, in the very beginning, people thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be the front runner, and people thought they had nowhere else to go. And the black people we've always been told, you do what the Clintons tell you to do. Is that not real? We've always been told that. There was very few that broke the mold there, and that didn't come until a little bit later on in his campaign. But unfortunately, there were some people in place where they were, I'm not going to say maybe they weren't even purposely doing it. But the truth is, yeah, there were some people in his organization that maybe did not prioritize black people in the way that they should have. But I will not allow you to pretend like it was Bernie Sanders who had a black problem. It was never Bernie Sanders who had a black problem. It wasn't. It wasn't, because saying that means he wasn't speaking to black voters. Saying that would mean that he wasn't bringing black people onto his campaign in leadership positions. Saying that would mean that black voters don't like him right now. And saying that would somehow have us be diverted from the reality that Hillary Clinton actually had a black problem. Hillary Clinton actually pushed Black Lives Matter activists out of her face when they tried to approach her about a black agenda, about her comments about being a super predator. They gave her an opportunity to address it. Okay, so let's talk about a black problem. We could start with me. I like to think I'm black. You know, cops have treated me like I'm black, so we just go with I'm black. I was one of the first people brought on to Bernie Sanders' campaign at the volunteer level because nobody had any money at that point. I was a president of Carolina Students for Bernie Sanders. Not only was I the president, I was a founder of Carolina Students for Bernie Sanders. We were the largest Bernie Sanders organization and probably, conversely, one of the most diverse because of just the nature of UNC. Shout out to Tar Heel. Sorry about that, Duke. Prayers up for Zion Williamson. Don't wish any bad or wish any injuries on anybody. But anyway, we were one of the most diverse groups in the country. We helped run Greensboro, the first rally that he threw in North Carolina. Once again, I'm black. Second of all, the position that I was assigned to wasn't my only position. I was also the president of North Carolina colleges for Bernie Sanders. And that was an election where I had a very fair chance to win. And of course, I ended up winning. Oh, but that wasn't it. Because of my personal success and the success of all the team that was with me, and the community around us, and because of us being able to coordinate and organize so well, I was also the acting state director until they could afford to pay somebody and let me live on with my college life. And once again, I'm black. Now, well, somebody would probably say something to the extent of, well, you know, they didn't know who you were. They didn't know you. Yeah, I beg to differ. When that campaign, Shannon Jackson emailed me directly. Shout out to Shannon. He contacted me asking me, I know, the black guy that Bernie has problems with, to help coordinate his rally in Greensboro, which ended up being enormous, and asked me to basically lead the volunteer organizers with making sure it went smoothly. And it went famously. Do you know why he emailed me? Yeah, maybe because I was a leader, right? Maybe it's because I was a leader in the campaign. Maybe it was because I was the president of Carolina Students for Bernie Sanders and they knew how big our club was. But actually, that wasn't it. What actually happened was I met Jane at Bernie Sanders rally in Fort Sumter, South Carolina, where all the black leaders were sitting directly and exclusively behind Bernie Sanders, the guy with the black problem. And for the first time in my short life at the time, I was 26 years old, I heard a president say that we must dismantle the prison industrial complex and explain exactly how black people specifically are affected. Not pulling any punches. Okay? I also saw for the first time in my lifetime a politician running for president specifically address and discuss income inequality amongst black people specifically. And unemployment and the disparity there for black people specifically. This is Fort Sumter, South Carolina. I don't know if you all know the significance of this. That is a dominantly white town. And that crowd, if you ever want to see a picture of it, was a dominantly white crowd. Now, I had a question for him. I said, isn't it important to have a young black, and this is an open town hall, do you believe it's important to have a young person of color, probably a black person, in a position to be a good influence on the election in whatever way it may be? Like, what is your stance on that? He addressed it and he agreed. Jane loved my question. And we chopped it up. I didn't actually know it was Bernie Sanders' wife at the time, funny enough. It wasn't until maybe a week later, Shannon emailed me. The senator thinks that you are an articulate and brilliant man. He loved hearing your insight, and he wants to meet with you backstage and talk about the strategy and how to approach the situation in North Carolina. And I did, but I was a little bit different because I'm not gonna let somebody cut me off from a camp, cut me off from nothing. So I was a little bit different. I was like, okay, cool. And I'm not gonna say that there was no attempt to intercept that, but it ended up happening. We were backstage. We talked to him. We shook hands. It was in the newspapers all over, and I got to let my executive board meet him. It was awesome, and he listened to me. He didn't do everything we had asked. But I don't necessarily believe that was his fault because I know what came later. So that's just one example. Next example I could easily give, right? Nina Turner. And last time I checked, Nina Turner is now the co-chair of his national level campaign and was the president of our revolution. We got a lot of problems with black people. That Bernie. You know what they always say, that white savior complex putting black people in charge of things like, our revolution, which, by the way, is wildly successful under a black woman. Wildly successful. But he has a black problem, right? Do you know who does have a black problem? Or who really has Hillary Clinton had a black problem. Hillary Clinton tokenized us. The Democratic Party tokenized us. What's worse than what you were trying to claim Bernie Sanders did, or a problem that he had, but wasn't real, at least not to the degree that you were claiming it was the fact that Hillary Clinton did win a lot of black votes. And all those black votes were predicated on lies, disinformation, false promises, and untruths. The fact that they never asked her to atone for the fact that she helped start Confederate Flag Day in Arkansas. They never asked her to atone for what she said to those Black Lives Matter activists. They never asked her to atone for that. She didn't even feel like she had to campaign talking about it. Remember, all lives matter at the first debate. Bernie was the only one that didn't have to caveat. They said, well, you say Black Lives Matter. Hillary Clinton said, well, I'll say all lives matter. Bernie's, no, Black Lives Matter. I don't need all that extra stuff. Period. Last time I checked, Bernie was also in the civil rights movement. Very active. Not only on his college campus, but in other avenues as well. But the numbers they'll point to, usually, are the votes, right? So how about I really explain what happened with the votes? The unfortunate truth of the matter is, like Bernie Sanders talked about in that speech that I told you all, Black people do suffer from a disparate amount of income inequality, racial income inequality, and racial unemployment. But in this particular case, racial income inequality is what really hurt the Black vote. And that's why these reports are disingenuous, and they know this. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of us are working 1 job, 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs. If you do have 1 job just to put food on the table, you're spending 50, 60, 70 hours a week just trying to get a few extra hours in, especially at that time around, what, it was just after Christmas maybe? How much time do you think I have to go on social media to look up whoever is the best for Black people? Seriously, how much time do you think that Black people had to do that? For a long time, they only thought that Hillary Clinton was the only one running. So let me ask you this then. Who really has a Black problem? Bernie Sanders or the media, the mainstream media, who went out of their way to keep the only candidate with an agenda that would actually benefit Black people? They kept him off the television screens. They smeared him in the newspaper, knowing exactly what we know now, knowing the knowledge that allowed him to accrue $6 million in 24 hours. Having the knowledge that convinced Killer Mike to endorse him, saying that he is the only one with the same agenda as Martin Luther King. The agenda of anti-imperialism, the agenda of uplifting the working class, and the agenda of having everybody live with dignity in a country that has all too much wealth. The same man who got the endorsement of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar amongst a plethora of other people of color. You kept him off the television screens, knowing our plight, knowing when we wouldn't see him. Because we have to put food on the table. We don't have time to dig and dig and dig and search and figure out and weave and bob through your lies. You don't care about Black people. You tried to keep us from the truth to uplift your elitist, corrupt, disingenuous shrill of a woman. The woman that called us super predators. The woman who wouldn't even apologize for her husband's crime bill. Bernie, every white person who is running for a leadership position like the president will have a quote unquote blind spot because it's just the way it is. But guess what you do when you have a blind spot? You hire or you bring on Nina Turner. You bring on Killer Mike. You bring on the Niko Houses of the world. You bring on, and if you would have known about his field directors, he had a lot of Black ones. Guess what they all did? The ones who weren't on his team betrayed him for Hillary. Which is what I was telling you to the beginning. A lot of people had their heart set on Hillary winning because they needed a job, they needed money, and that's what Black people were told. And you want to be exiled if you did not. When the when the African American caucus and its leaders tried to meet with Bernie Sanders, the Aisha Due stood in between them and tried to prevent them actively in North Carolina from seeing him, to the point where Shannon Jackson had to step in and ask her, what the hell are you doing? Bernie always meets with Black leadership in every state he's been to. He doesn't say from a pedestal, from a podium, hey y'all, I'm looking. He has them right next to him when he is speaking most of the time. You shut those stories out. The stories that I saw. You knew that by the time Black people found out about Bernie Sanders, it would have been far too late for them to have done anything about it because Super Tuesday would have been over. And that's exactly what happened. And using these bogus numbers to you know they're bogus. But this same media, because that's a racist tactic. That is a type of election rigging. This same media who would tell you that Bernie Sanders has a black problem will not have the decency or the integrity to admit it was them who had a black problem, and it is still them who has a black problem, because they're not talking about Kamala's real black problem as we speak. Her real pandering as we speak. What, because Kamala's black, we're not going to talk about her staff? I think, her sister is the only blackish person on her staff that we know of any significance? Who has she elevated? The DNC has a black problem. When Nina Turner was poised to announce Bernie Sanders at the Democratic National Convention. And what did you all do? Because Nina wouldn't play your game, you wouldn't let her nominate him. But who has a black problem? I don't expect Bernie Sanders to be MLK. He can't empathize with black issues, but he can sympathize with black issues. And he may not be able to speak holistically to the black issues, but he can put people in power like Nina Turner to do that for him, because it may not be his place, but it's perfectly fine when she does it. And guess what she's done? You know why Killer Mike endorsed Bernie Sanders? It's not because of him, not that he's a bad guy. It's because of Nina Turner. That endorsement doesn't come unless Bernie Sanders puts her in positions to influence the outcome of this election. But he has a black problem. The problem was y'all hid him from the black community because you knew how dangerous he was to your election and to your system and to your prison industrial complex that you all profit from. That he wanted legitimate change. And no, he has the reparations thing is problematic. I don't like that he said that. But guess what? Other people in his circle don't like it either. And when that time comes, they will sit down and they will discuss what the best way to go about that is. And if that's one problem and you're going to fix and address a lot of the other issues, that's more than any other candidate right now. But we have a black problem. They emailed me personally when I was a college student to tell me how much he wanted my personal opinion about how to move about North Carolina and how to win it. And we did ultimately end up winning Chapel Hill, but there was rigging everywhere, and we know this. You don't do that unless you respect the black voices in your campaign. Now, that is not to say that other people did not respect the black voices in his campaign, but what's new? You think if you don't have a Kamala Harris that there are other black people who don't get shut down regularly when they're trying to tell her this isn't smart? Why do you think she keeps doing it? Because the black voices in her campaign are not being uplifted or elevated either. That's exactly why. But we don't talk about Kamala's black problem, but you call everybody who critiques her because of her black problem, everybody who critiques her is racist. Okay. Let them keep convincing you that Bernie Sanders has a black problem. Black people know about him now. And he is the most favorable candidate thus far amongst black Democratic voters. So keep believing the lies like y'all believed those polls before. 99% chance of winning. Remember, that's what they said Hillary about Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders is 6th. Remember who was ahead of him? Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. Remember, he was 6th in the polls. Yeah. 6 million? Wow. 24 hours. But let them keep trying to tell you he has a black problem all the way to the White House. Thanks for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. You can donate to our Patreon and keep helping the network grow by clicking on the link in the description below. And also, make sure you join us at JustNForm.com. And finally, make sure you subscribe to us on Roku and be part of the very first independent news network on Roku TV. But more than anything else, always remember, Find your balance. Peace.